my school, only the thick girls went off and did domestic science.
Yes,
or maybe
that's
they
right.
weren't the thick girls, but they were that was how they were presented to us. I mean, it's shocking now. You would
No,
not.
you're right. At my local secondary school, that's right. It was the inverted thick girls that went off and did domestic science. You know, made
Yeah.
Victoria sponges and.
I mean, we were all really jealous because they brought back, delicious things to eat. And I had one of those evenings where you have one too many bottles of wine with your best friends and talk about what you'd really like to do. How would your life how should it really be? And I was 27, I think, by now. And I said, oh, well, I'd like to be a food writer. But I think it's a problem with the media that it tends to be very London focused, and it tends to think that things which are happening in London are echoed all the way around the country. But actually, they aren't. Things happen differently.
Yes.
In other parts of the country.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to How to Have Extraordinary Relationships. Anna with Xanthe Clay, who many of you will know of, might have met. And also here's Elizabeth Luard, both of whom are wonderful food writers and food tasters. Food is their world. And they've brought it to all of us.
Oh, fantastic. Oh, wonderful.
Which you have. We're here in honor of you and Xanthe for teaching us all about food and ingredients and recipes. And we're going to have a lovely conversation about how this has all come about. Because I met Xanthe many years ago now. We went to India.
We did. We went to Mumbai together.
Yes, we did. With the people who are the brains and brawn behind Dishoom, the restaurant chain. Is not quite the right word, but yeah. And what was amazing about Xanthe for me is that she ate absolutely everything. She didn't blanch. Brains appeared, all sorts of things appeared. And I think I bailed out when it came to the brains. But no, you take your job. You do that job because you go and you taste everything and you try everything.
You want to know the one thing I wouldn't eat? There was something that is a line. You see, I thought I ate everything. I thought,
what's the line?
And the line came when I was at a food festival in New Zealand called the Hokitika Wild Food Festival. And somebody offered me a cup of horse semen.
Oh!
And that was my moment. I said no. I didn't think I ever said no. I said no.
And was it good?
You could have it flavoured. No, it wasn't.
Oh
good.
no! Stop! No, that's
but you could choose your stallion.
Fantastic.
And what was the idea behind? What was the idea behind it? Was it why did they drink it?
I think it was going to make me really, really hot in bed. I suspect.
Yeah, it always is, isn't it? So shallow.
Everything all comes down to sex in the end. Food, sex.
I'd have to go and catch snails. We're eating snails.
We might have to show you our snails
If I come to the screen, I would come to the screen because I love snails. Okay, so you've traveled the world. You've eaten. So tell me how you got into your relationship with food. How did you get into this whole thing in the beginning?
So I think people often say, how they learned to cook at their mother's knee, which, although my mother was a fantastic cook, is a fantastic cook. I didn't particularly learn to cook from her because, except in terms of watching what she did, because actually food was expensive and we weren't well off, and it was too expensive and too important to trust children with, and also it mattered if it was good. She cared a lot about whether it was right, and so I wouldn't be allowed to cook supper for the family as a child or do any of those things that we all encourage our children to do now. But what I was allowed to do, and I still think this was a pretty good training, was I was allowed to make the salad dressing. And I think actually learning to balance the sweetness of a sweetener, of honey, the bitterness of the olive oil, the acidity of the vinegar, the saltiness of the salt, and then the spiciness of the pepper, putting all those things together and getting a good balance was really good training. And as I say, it mattered. It was important. You know, if my salad dressing wasn't up to scratch, I knew about it.
She was a cook. I mean, she was a good cook, you know, because I mean, I grew up in the 1970s. You know, I was born in 66. And my mother, who thankfully won't listen to this, was an atrocious cook. I mean, we ate alphabeti spaghetti out of a tin and choc ices out of a wrapper. And I mean, my mother would never have made salad dressing. I mean, we had that, what's it called? It's not mayonnaise, salad cream.
Oh, salad cream.
Nice. Is that what it was called? Salad cream.
Not keen on that, no.
No, well, no one's keen. It's disgusting. So in terms of learning to cook for me, that would never have happened. So your mother must, so whenever I say to my mother, why can't you cook, which I have said, she said, well, I was a war baby, you know, there wasn't any food around and blah, 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 blah. But that's obviously not the case for everybody. Where did your mother learn her love of cooking from?
I think it's very layered. So if you talk to my mother about her mother didn't cook, or only cooked under duress, because cooking was something that educated women didn't do.
Yes.
And that it was something that somebody else did for you. It was a chore. You know, eating food, nice food was nice. So I'm not sure my grandmother was even that bothered about that. She was very bothered about wine. She knew her wine, but she certainly didn't want to cook and regarded it as a drudgery. And so when my mother, who got a scholarship to Oxford and studied at Oxford and did all those things, wanted to cook and liked cooking, my grandmother was appalled. She said, what did we educate you for? And you've gone off and cooked. And though my mother was a professional cook, she did other things. It was a hobby, but she fell in love with food, I think, through Elizabeth David.
Yeah,
she was that generation.
yeah.
So she was born in 1935, so she sort of came of age with those books.
Yes, absolutely.
And so we grew up with, you know, sort of Mediterranean beef stews with olives in and all of those sorts of things.
Amazing.
Which was great. But then even then, I remember, you know, going to school, and it was still the same story that my grandmother had been telling, that if you were, as a young woman, if you were being educated and going off to have a career, to be a career woman, as they were called, cooking wasn't part of it. So, you know, brutally, at my school, only the thick girls went off and did domestic science.
Yes,
or maybe they weren't the thick girls, but that was how they were presented to us. I mean, it's shocking now.
No, you're right. At my local secondary school, that's right. It was the inverted thick girls that went off and did domestic science. You know, made Victoria sponges, and
I mean, we were all really jealous because they brought back, you know, delicious things to eat and stuff. So we would have loved it, but yeah, it was never presented as an option to me. It was never put there as something. And even in my early 20s, there was still this hangover from pre-war Britain that it was actually a bit vulgar to talk about food. That food was not really it wasn't an appropriate subject for conversation. And I did have one boyfriend who told me I was the most boring person he'd ever met on the subject of food. I'd like to say he didn't last very long. But anyway, Malcolm, if you're listening, I heard
you you didn't get together with Xanthe, you fool. Yeah, that's right. People didn't talk about food, and food was disgusting. You'd go, I mean, I remember going to a Burney Inn with my parents, and that was the highlight of my culinary experience.
Yeah, I remember those. I also think that during the sort of 80s, when ready meals came along, it's very hard to remember because now people like me, you know, write about how terrible they are and how they're ultra processed food and we shouldn't be touching a ready meal and we should all be cooking from scratch. But actually, back then, they represented liberation from the kitchen. Back then, they represented something that allowed women to go out to work.
Yes.
That said you didn't have to have the drudgery of putting food on the table 3 times a day. And the same with the drudgery of, you didn't have the drudgery of having to cook all the time for your family. And you had the freedom to do other things. And the same with supermarkets. Again, you know, now we kind of see supermarkets as the bad guys, and certainly, you know, they often don't seem to treat their small suppliers very well, and there's all sorts of issues about them. But, you know, growing up in the 80s, there weren't shops open in the evening. It wasn't, and going shopping anyway in the 70s meant going to lots of different shops often.
Yes, absolutely.
And it just it's really hard to remember how these things that we were royal now actually did represent a sort of liberation, particularly for women.
Yes, I think that's very true. I mean, my mother, I used to follow her around the butcher, the baker, the greengrocer. I mean, you know, in the high street where we lived, I mean, they're not there anymore. Of course, they're not. They're coffee shops. But actually, yeah, I mean, if I think about it, do you think the quality of food was better? I mean, people say the quality of food was better. I don't know if that's a romantic rose-tinted look at it.
Well, I think that food was different, and we had different options, and that perhaps so for instance, if you went to a butcher, or actually even in Sainsbury's, I remember you would get a much wider range of offal and cuts available. So we could buy sweetbreads in our local Sainsbury's in the late 70s.
Wow. Yeah,
that.
you wouldn't
Now
know.
that's just unthinkable, you know. So although we do have more variety and we do have more range, we have also lost some things as well. So it's not been entirely a one-way street, I suppose.
So how did you how did you get into the world of it? I mean, how have you ended up? I mean, you've been writing about it, and you've traveled the world. You've had this amazing career in food.
It's been and continues to be incredible. And I mean incredible in every sense. I do, you know, it is very unlikely in many ways, but I was working as a bookseller in London, having dropped out of university, and my bookseller group went bust. It was a group called Dillon's, you know, I've heard of it.
Oh, I remember Dillon's, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I was made redundant actually in the sort of first wave. And at that time I'd just met the chap who's now my husband, and he said, well, obviously if you're not going to be a bookseller anymore, you should train to be a chef, you know, that should be your next career. And I just had not crossed my mind to do that. I said, I can't do that. I mean, but nothing else was going on, so off I went and did it. And I think I was worried that that by working as a chef, I would lose something that gave me pleasure, because I would turn it into a chore again. But happily, that didn't happen. And I think the other thing was, because this was 1995 and 96, and no, 95. It was before the internet was a thing, it was before social media, it was before any of those things. And I felt very much pretty isolated when it came to food. I mean, my mother was interested in Elizabeth David and things like that, but beyond that, it was quite hard to find other people who were really interested. So I think we forget that before the internet, before social media, it was much harder to find your tribe. It was much harder to find people who had the same interests as you. And as I said, I had a boyfriend who told me I was the most boring person in the world about food. I wasn't really in a sort of nurturing environment when it came to talking and writing about food. And so arriving at Leeds, because I went to Leeds to do the intermediate term there.
Yes, you went to Leeds.
And we could only afford one term, but it was still amazing. And I remember arriving and sitting in this room surrounded by all these other people who were training with me, and thinking, all of these people were all talking about food, we're all interested about food, we all want to be food geeks, you know, we're all, and it was the most extraordinary feeling. I mean, now you can go online and find your group of people like that and it's fine, but then it really, really was an extraordinary thing. So I had a very happy term at Leeds, and in fact Leeds helped me find my first couple of jobs, and I was working in a little kitchen in Bath because I got married after that first time, and went and moved out of London into the country, and I worked in a little restaurant in Bath, and I had one of those evenings where you have one too many bottles of wine with your best friends and talk about what you'd really like to do. You know, how would your life really, how should it really be? And I was 27, I think, by now, and I said, oh, well, I'd like to be a food writer because what I loved was every Saturday. In those days, it was Saturday papers were the best for food. I used to go and buy all the Saturday papers, and I used to read Simon Hopkinson and Sybil Kapoor and Philippa Davenport and all these extraordinary food writers, Sophie Grigson, and just found them utterly inspiring. And I said, so I said to my friend, I'd like to be a food writer, but I could never, ever aspire to those sort of heights. And she said, you should try it. The moment fast anyway. And a few days later, I was prepping up for lunchtime service in the kitchen where I was working, and a phone call came through on the landline, on the kitchen phone. We didn't have mobiles in those days, and it was my friend who's a photographer, and she was a freelance photographer. And again, in those days, you didn't send your photographs down the line when you'd taken them, because they weren't digital photographs, they were negatives, they were on film. And she had taken some pictures for the Telegraph, and she had had them developed and was taking the contract sheets into the office, because that's how it was done in those days. And she said, I've delivered these photos, and I don't know, there's something going on in the office. I think you should just give them a ring and ask them if you can have a job. And I said, I'm not doing that, they'd be ridiculous. And she said, yes, you can. And this is the number that you ring, and I'm going to put this phone down, and in 30 seconds, I'm going to ring this number again, and I want to hear it's engaged because you were on the phone. So she's from New Zealand. They're quite tough in New Zealand.
You really getting you moving.
And so I didn't have time to think about it. I just rang the number and I said, hello, I'd really like to write for you. I can't remember exactly what I said. It's kind of been blocked out of but something like that. And to their credit, they were a bit surprised. It was a wonderful woman called Rachel Simone, who was the editor of the Weekend section, who I spoke to.
Yes, I remember her. Yeah.
And she said, well, okay, send us something in then. And again, in those days, you couldn't look at people's work online. You couldn't look at their blog or look at their Instagram following or look at what other things you were doing. Or the only, as an editor, if you wanted to find new people, it had to be through word of mouth and looking around and, so I sent in an article. I wrote an article about hiring a cook to take with you on holiday. And I sent it in, and various people were completely lovely to me and gave me quotes. And so I remember ringing up the River Cafe at 11 o'clock at night and speaking to Rose Gray, and she just talked to me for ages. And I was nobody, absolutely nobody. I just run the kitchen at 11 o'clock at night, and what an amazing woman. Anyway, I sent in the articles, and I said at the same time, I think you should be doing a reader's recipe column, because readers' recipes are, you can do them without it being done market. You can do them in a way that's really interesting and fresh. And I think I was very lucky in that I hit a moment when newspapers were just realising that they had to be outward facing. They had to start listening to their readers rather than just standing on a box and preaching at them. So they picked up the idea and gave me the column, which still seems completely remarkable. So I did that for a few years, and I absolutely loved it. It was the most extraordinary time, because again, the internet was just coming in, but most people still wrote. So I have boxes and boxes of handwritten letters, some of them from really, people who sadly will have died by now.
Yes.
And I really felt I caught a moment of history. One woman wrote to me, and she had been a kitchen maid during World War One. In a country house in World War One, and she wrote to me with her recipe for cooking peas, and how she would how she would put honey on one pea pod. So she'd pod the peas, but one pea pod she would spread with honey and put into the pot to cook with the peas. And that was how she did it. And she said that pea pod was your perk, the cook's perk at the end, once you'd cooked your peas. And I still do that.
And have you got the recipes still?
Yes, I've got them all. They're all some of the box. They're so precious to me, actually. They're, you know, among the things I'd say if the house was on fire, because what a privilege, you know. And that sounds kind of cold, but I mean it. That when people write to you, they're really exposing themselves in a way, and they're trusting you, and to have that sort of insight into their kitchen life, I think it's a real honour.
Yes.
And I absolutely love them.
It sounds amazing to have all those, because they're all handwritten back then, aren't they? Because there was no internet. So, I mean, what's changed for you? If we think back then, I launched Observer Food Monthly, I can't remember when, 2001, something like that, 2000. And that was the beginnings of that explosion of food, of Marco Pierre White and Gordon Ramsay and Angela Hartnett and Novelli and all these.
That was about the time, because Jamie Oliver came on the scene about 2000, 2001, didn't he? And so did Nigella Lawson.
Yes, that's right. And it became televised in a different way.
Yes, came on the telly.
So did you see a massive shift? And also international cuisine. I mean, when I was a kid, there was a Chinese takeaway that probably didn't have any Chinese food in it at all. And that was it. I don't remember anything other than that. That was a big thing.
I think it's a problem with the media that it tends to be very London focused, and it tends to think that things which are happening in London are echoed all the way around the country, but actually they aren't. Things happen differently.
Yes.
In other parts of the country. So I do think that is a bit of an issue, and it's one of the things I was really sad about moving out of London, and I'd always been such a Londoner. And actually I think it was really good for me, because it has opened my eyes to how many amazing things are happening not in London, and how in London I think chefs in particular often have a little bit more room to breathe, perhaps.
Yes.
And there's some really exciting innovation happening in restaurants outside London, for instance.
So what did you, so you've had, it's this journey between the box of handwritten letters of a woman who's a Downton Abbey sort of a life.
Yeah.
There's some which you kind of experienced. There's something now that's very different. I mean, we had this complete rise in celebrity chefs. How did that affect what you were doing, or what do you feel about that? Which ones did you think, wow, that's exciting, that's really different?
I think that the thing about deputy chefs is that they do all the cooking ones, the Nigellas and the Jamies, is that they do inspire us to cook and go back and cook from scratch. So at a time when there is still a decline on home cooking, people who encourage us, who make it achievable, who point out that you can do things simply. And to me, the best ones are the ones who make mistakes and say, you know what, you made a mistake, doesn't matter. I made a mistake, doesn't matter. And perhaps we need to see a little bit more of that on television. So I think that they have a really important role, celebrity chefs. But there's obviously some more important systemic stuff that we need to do in terms of teaching a generation of young people skills, of kids skills, which in the past they would have picked up from their mothers, or I should say the girls would have picked up from their mothers, the boys wouldn't have bothered. So I think there is a lot of work to be done there. But and I also think that, obviously there's been this big rise in eating out. I mean, I think when we were kids, Lucy, it was eating out was, something that happened, birthdays, anniversaries.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, it was a real treat. Well, my daughter is 17, loves to cook, but she likes to cook from Caribbean cookbooks, and we live in the middle of the home counties. So, so yes, we can get all these ingredients now, but there's places where we can't. But if you were to cook your signature dish, if you were sending in your recipe, to a version of you, what would your recipe be? What would you be sending into the readers' recipes?
Oh gosh. What would I send it? Okay, one of my favorite dishes to make, and it's just a really simple family supper, and it's really wholesome, would be a tin of sardines cooked in olive oil until they mush up to a lovely sort of savoury puree, and then I would add some fennel seed and a little bit of chili, and then some sliced up cabbage, and then steam the cabbage in that sort of sardine sauce, and it's completely yummy and not fishy at all, and it's really, really good for you. It's really wholesome, and it's a lovely thing. So maybe that would be, or else it might be samphire. I love samphire.
Yes,
And just
I
some
love
steamed samphire mixed with some brown shrimps. Brown shrimps, one of my favourite things.
Oh, yummy.
That would be completely delicious as well. So many things. And also I am a complete sucker for soft serve ice cream.
Oh,
In fact,
yummy.
I have a t-shirt done that just says soft serve slut, because that's me, basically. I love soft serve.
So have you ever had a meal or that's really blown your mind? That you thought,
gosh.
wow, what, I remember going to the Fat Duck quite a long time ago now. So I don't think necessarily it's about the quality of the food, but that experience was like something I'd never experienced before.
I went to a restaurant called El Bulli.
Well, really, yeah.
Which was very famous, and I went there in 2007. And it was sort of the first restaurant where everybody was desperate to get a table, and you had to send a fax at 1 minute past midnight, and to try and get a booking and all of these things. Anyway, I managed to get a booking, and I went, and it was just extraordinary. It was 30 something courses. I mean, each of them canapé size, but this was at a time when that was new. I mean, I now like everybody's doing that, but. And what I remember was that how delicious the food was, with one exception. There was a pancake made with the skin on the top of the milk. When you keep milk.
Oh,
and
stop!
And that was really bad. I hated
Some
that.
things just are disgusting. I don't care what they do with them. That is disgusting, and it's not.
Everything else was delicious, absolutely amazing. And then afterwards, I went to so many restaurants which were sort of trying to copy El Bulli and doing what was called then, it's not a very fashionable term anymore, but was called then micro gastronomy.
Yeah.
And it was so sort of depressing, and things like they do this thing called spherification, where they'd make these sort of egg yolks by dropping liquid into a solution that sort of encased it. And the thing is that worked at El Bulli because it was done in so finely that it just, you didn't even notice there was anything encasing it. It just sort of exploded in your mouth. It was just incredible. But the more it was done by chefs who weren't that good, the thicker that layer became, and it became this sort of really rather unpleasant sort of gummy layer on the outside of a liquid. It just wasn't nice. So I kept on having these meals that were supposed to be in the same style and not very good. And I thought, well, maybe my mind's playing tricks with me. Maybe that meal at El Bulli was not as amazing as I remember it. It's just that it was so it was so different and so special.
So I mean, that food, but food. I mean, what are your? I mean, this is a big question, maybe hard to answer, but we have such relationships with food. It's so meaningful to us, not everybody, not to everybody, but it's such a huge subject, isn't it? And now we're also talking about food for health and gut health and what we should be eating and what we shouldn't be eating. It's got very intense. I feel it's got very intense.
And someone said to me the other day, the problem with that is that by and large, the foods which are really good for us to eat aren't in packaging. So where would you put the label?
Yes, yes.
And that's true. Yeah.
What do you feel your relationship with food is? What does it mean to you in your life?
It's everything in my life revolves around food pretty much. I mean, when I go on holiday, I mark out the meal times and allocate each meal time. And the first thing I do is, before I even book my flights or anything, I find out when the market days are in anywhere we're going, so that I know that I work it out so that we're there during market day. And stuff like that. So yeah, pretty obsessed. But you know, that's my job. It's fine.
It is also, but do you believe that people have emotional connections to food? I mean, I think food has resonance, doesn't it? People remember a really great meal, or they remember what they were eating when something beautiful happened, or it goes beyond nutrition.
Definitely. I think well, meal times are meaningful times, aren't they? And so simply sitting around the table with people and sharing a meal is enormously significant. And how things taste to us is very connected with who we're with and what other people and how we feel, and how even the kind of music that's playing will affect our perception of acidity and savouriness and all of those things. So it is an enormously emotional thing, and people, it's not uncommon for people to be moved to tears by tasting something they haven't tasted for a long time. It does reach into our inner psyche, I think, in a way that smell does. Smell is incredibly connecting, isn't it? And of course, smell is very much the same as flavour, and that's, but you can walk down the street and smell a certain smell and be transported, and I think food has that same magic. And I also think that what's overlooked is how addicted we can become to that. And that many of us do have quite troubling relationships with food, because food is incredibly sensual, and I think it does satisfy a craving.
Yes.
Over and beyond hunger. I'm not talking about eating when you're hungry.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Lots of people eat, including myself, not because I'm hungry. I mean, I will eat because I'm hungry, but I eat for many other reasons.
Yeah.
This is where it gets complicated. And when I meet people that don't eat very much, and they probably are eating the right amount, I always look at them quite suspiciously. Because for me, it's about life, and it's about bon vivant, and it's all about that, socializing and the wine flows, but actually, that's not just about the food.
It's not. But I do think that there are some people, and I think I'm one of them, for whom eating does release very particular kinds of chemicals in the brain.
If you were going to a desert island and someone said you can only take one country's cuisine, you'll take British food.
Yeah.
Would you? You're about the only person I know that said that. I didn't know there was such a thing as British food.
Beautiful apple pies and perfect roast beef and Yorkshire pudding, but also all the amazing food you can eat in these sort of modern British restaurants. These wonderful melting pot tables of food, which I just think are completely remarkable. But yeah, British, definitely.
And do you still cook a lot, or have you got to the stage of thinking, I can't bear cooking another roast in my life?
Oh no, I cook. I can't. I find it really hard not to cook. So when I go away, I mean, if I'm away for work, I'm often staying in a hotel. But if we go away on holiday, I don't want to stay in a hotel. I want to stay in somewhere that's got a kitchen, because even if we don't use it, it makes me feel better to know it's there.
Yes,
it's my comfort blanket. I know it's there. And it means I can go to a market and not just be a spectator. I can buy those beautiful calamari or whatever it is, and take them home and cook them and experiment and play and learn stuff. There's so much to learn.
Yes, there's always so much to learn. Yeah, so you'll carry on doing your explorations. I mean, you're traveling a lot around the world. You know, you've just come back from Australia.
Yeah, yeah.
Do you have particular cuisines that you feel like, yes, and other ones you're like, I mean, I had the worst meal I've ever had in my life in Romania, so I'm never going to try and eat there again. I thought it was cheese. It turned out to be animal fat. But you're good at that. You're really good, I think, at finding pockets of interesting foods wherever you go.
I think there almost always is. I think the problem is that sometimes it's in people's homes, and that's always the biggest treat. I mean, the best trips I've done have always been where I've been invited into someone's house, and that's the hugest thing. That's the kind of money can't buy experience.
Yes.
Someone's house, meeting their house.
And would you do Xanthe Clay's travels around the world? I like the name Clay, you know, clay pots. I mean, it's a very good name for a show.
Yeah, well, posh bird travels around the world, and yeah, I'm just not seeing this as something that's going to be attractive to people. But yes, if someone asked me, of course I'd do it. I'd be delighted.
We'd love.
Although, having said that, I have done a little bit of work in television, and it is an absolutely brutal world. I mean, it's a and it's tough, and it's, you know, it looks so beautiful on the screen, but you know, the kind of work and the pressure that goes on to get that there is, not necessarily the nicest way to experience places, I would have said.
So you've met lots of people. You're now at Elizabeth Luard's home. So she's a renowned foodie and she's cooking you snails.
Yeah, we've got snails for supper and rabbit. And
rabbit?
Yes.
Are you here in the UK?
I am, yes. Yes.
I mean, I'm vegetarian now, but actually one of the best meals I've ever had was in Switzerland, and it was rabbit. And I really do love rabbit.
I love rabbit. I do get a bit cross about restaurants using farmed rabbit, because farmed rabbit's really boring. It's like breast of chicken without the skin. It's, you know, the skin's the nicest bit on the chicken. Yeah. So it's a really boring cut of meat. And all kinds of meat. Whereas wild rabbit's much more interesting. But also we have so many rabbits. We need to, you know, eat our rabbits, eat our wild rabbits.
Yes, we do. We've got so much wildlife we can eat.
Yeah, so don't farm rabbits. Why let them be wild and happy and then eat them?
Yes, I agree. So, Xanthe, thank you so much for coming on. It was really interesting. There's lots of areas we can do more on, but
thank you for having me. And I was so nervous about coming on, and you've been so lovely, and it's been so easy, and I've just, you know, really enjoyed myself.
I just think it's fascinating to hear about that whole history with food, and food is such an interesting subject. I think it's interesting to everybody, and you have such a. Is
there any other subject? Is there anything else to talk about?
Well, I don't think so. I've stopped cooking. You'll be so sad to know I just don't cook anymore. Really rarely. And I realized, I think so. We're right at the end, but I mean, I think there's a lineage. You know, I come from a family of people that don't cook. My mother's mother didn't cook because, like you say, she was educated, posh. It wasn't posh, but you know, so they had to cook. I'll let you go. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I'll send it to you until then. Yes, take care.
Just tell me, if you're not cooking, how are you eating?
Oh, you know, my kids cook.
Okay.
I've delegated.